learners and learners. In the series of international relations theory, now I am going to discuss with you Neorealism or Structural Realism. It is an important theory of international relations. Realism or Neorealism in international relations, it is broadly studied under the security studies, which is primarily concerned with state security and survival. They are concerned with power and national interest. So these are their main focused areas. They give a lot of importance to the institution of state or state sovereignty. They are also concerned about state security and its survival. They are also concerned about power and national interest. Neorealism or structural realism is associated with Kenneth Waltz. Some of his main works are Man, the State and War, that was published in 1959, and The Theory of International Politics in 1979. Waltz's book, Theory of International Politics, has been described as the single most widely read contribution to Neorealism, establishing him as the paradigmatic successor of Morgenthau. Now, what is Neorealism and what are its core assumptions? So first thing is that Neorealism, it is an extension of classical realism. It explains the patterns of international events in terms of the structure of international system and distribution of power in that. Now, what is the meaning of it? Classical realist scholars, they give a lot of importance to human nature. According to them, human nature is the key determining factor of the behavior of state or the nature of international politics. So if you want to understand international politics, you have to understand the human nature. On the other hand, if we talk about neorealism, they believe that international events can be understood in the context of the structure of international system. It means the state or their behavior, it is conditioned by the structure of international system. Now in that structure, the power is distributed and it is not distributed evenly across states. So we also have to see how power is distributed in that international system. Another important thing that neorealist scholars believe is that this structure, it is marked by anarchy, and states, they are hierarchically placed in that structure. Now what is the meaning of it? So when we see the structure of international system, it is marked by anarchy. It means that there is no overarching higher authority that can balance or that can guide the behavior of state. So state here is a sovereign actor. Every state is free to act in its own ways. State is not bound by any international body or even laws or even morality. If we look at the structure of international system, it is also hierarchical in nature. It means that all the states, they are not equally placed or they are not having equal powers. Rather, they are hierarchically placed in that international structure according to their power, according to their position. Neorealism also explores how and why the states behave in a particular manner, and it tries to give some of the most rational explanations of the behavior of state. It is because of anarchy or no other higher authority that can act as a binding force on the behavior of state that leads to uncertainty and insecurity. So every state is victim of uncertainty and insecurity because there is no higher authority and because anarchy is prevailing at the international level. States, they can never be certain about their own securities. It leads to a security dilemma. That security dilemma leads to a continuous struggle for power. Security is one of the primary fundamental concerns of each and every state. Now when states are not certain about their own securities, And when their security is threatened by the power or the rise of some other states, it leads to a security dilemma where every state is forced to respond, right? So if other states are increasing their power, then every other state has to respond to that. Another thing is that when all the states try to increase their powers, it leads to a continuous struggle for power among all the states. Now, every state it tries to become as much powerful as possible so that nobody could threaten their position. Wall's theory of international politics seeks to provide a scientific explanation of the international political system. Neorealism is more scientific in the sense of proposing certain general laws to explain international events. He takes some elements of classical realism as a starting point, like independent states existing and operating in a system of international anarchy. So here there is a commonality between classical realism and neorealism, but he departs from that tradition by giving no account of human nature and by ignoring the ethics of statecraft. Domestic politics is not that important factor in determining the behavior of state according to Kenneth Walls. It has a very limited role to play, and that also is occasionally. So domestic politics is not very important because every state and its behavior it is conditioned by the structure of international system. Great powers are crucially important for determining changes in the structure of international system. So smaller countries or countries that have comparatively less powers, they are not that significant in that international system which is marked by anarchy. A balance of power between states can be achieved, but war always remains a possibility in an anarchical system. Neorealism also believe in the polarity of an international distribution of power. Now, what is the polarity of international distribution of power? We often hear these terms like a unipolar world or a bipolar world or a tripolar world. Now, the tripolar world was something that was existing in 1960s and 70s when it was believed that primarily there are three powers, USA, USSR and China, and the multipolar world. Kenneth Walls believed that bipolar systems are comparatively more stable and thus they provide a better guarantee for peace and security than do multipolar systems. With only two great powers, both can be expected to act to maintain the system. Now, if we go by this logic or if we go by these views, the Cold War can be seen as a period of international stability and peace. So here neo-realist scholars and Kenneth Walls, they believe that bipolar system it is comparatively more stable because the states that are leading that system they have direct stakes and both of them are they are generally equally concerned about the stability and peace. In Kenneth Walls' views, the best IR theory is one that focuses centrally on the structure of the system, on its interacting units, and on the continuities and changes of the system. Neorealist scholars believe that states have similar functions, but they differ significantly from each other in terms of their power and capabilities. So states they have certain similar functions. For example, all the states they play certain basic functions in spite of their differences of culture or ideologies or constitutions or history. So they have certain basic tasks to perform. For example, all the states have to collect taxes. All the states have to conduct foreign policy and so on. States differ significantly only in regard to their greatly varying capabilities. In Wall's own words, the state units of an international system are distinguished primarily by their greater or lesser capabilities for performing similar tasks. The structure of a system changes with changes in the distribution of capabilities across systems units. State sovereignty, in a way, means a self-help system to neorealist scholars. To say that a state is sovereign means that it decides for itself how it will cope with its internal and external problems. Sovereign states are postulated as independent of other sovereign states. But what is this independence? According to Kenneth Walls, each state is formally equal of all other states, and none is entitled to command, none is required to obey. So when such kind of conditions prevail, then it leads to a self-help system. It means international system is composed of sovereign states. No state is subordinated to anyone. Every state is free to act in its own national interest. Every state is entitled to defend itself. So it leads to a self-help system where state has to depend on its own power and on its own capabilities. Now, what are the similarities and dissimilarities between classical realism and neorealism? So classical realism has certain similarities with neorealism. For example, both believe in state sovereignty or state as the primary actor in international relations. Both believe that anarchy prevails at the international level. It means that there is no higher authority or no international organization whose order are binding on the behavior of states. Both acknowledges the limitations of morality in international relations. Both believe that international system is a self-help system where every state has to depend on its own capabilities. Walt's neorealism is distinctive from traditional or classical realism in a number of ways. So here we'll see some of the differences between realism, classical realism and neorealism. So the first such difference is that realism is primarily an inductive theory. Neorealists such as Kenneth Walsh do not deny the importance of unit-level explanations. However, they believe the effects of structure must be considered. So here neorealist scholar, they give more importance to structure than units. According to Walsh, structure is defined by the ordering principle of the international system, which is anarchy, and the distribution of capabilities across units, which are states. In an anarchic system, states with greater powers tend to have greater influence. So if we go by these premises, hierarchy and anarchy, these are the two ordering principles of international system. The structure of international system also shapes all the foreign policy choices of the state. It means international structure is one of the primary guiding force or determining factor of the foreign policy of different states. Every state, they have to respond to certain realities, certain challenges that are posed by international structure. Second difference is their view of power. To realist scholars, power is an end in itself. States use power to gain more power and thus increase their influence and ability to secure their national interest. Although traditional realists recognize different elements of power such as economic power, power of resources, or technological power, or say military power, right? So they give lot of importance to various dimensions of power. But for new realists, power is more than the accumulation of military resources and the ability to use this power to coerce and control other states in the system. Kenneth Walsh and other neorealists see power as the combined capabilities of a state. So power is not limited to military power only. Power gives a state a place or position in international system and that shapes the state's behavior. Third difference is how states react to the condition of anarchy. To realist scholars, anarchy is a condition of the international system and states, they have to react to it according to their size, location, domestic politics, and leadership qualities. In contrast, neorealist scholars suggest that anarchy defines the international system. So here, anarchy is a demarcating factor, key deciding factor of international system. All states are functionally similar units, meaning that they all experience the same kind of constraints presented by anarchy and strive to maintain their position in the system. But each state responds to this anarchy differently. For example, smaller states, they try to respond to this anarchy by joining alliances, by playing the role of some kind of an activist in the regional and international organization, by emphasizing on controlling the arms race or demanding disarmament, etc. On the other hand, if we see the behavior of bigger states, then they prefer unilateral strategies to deal with anarchy. It means that they rely more on their own powers. Now there are different kind of versions also of neorealism that exist. The first one is of Kenneth Walt's theory of structural realism. Then there is a second version of neorealism. So there is a second group of neorealist scholars which is represented by the scholarly contributions of Joseph Greco, who has integrated Walt's ideas with the ideas of more traditional realists to construct a contemporary or modern realist profile. So Joseph Greco, he talked about absolute and relative gains, and according to Joseph Greco, every state it wants both kind of gains, but whenever they have to deal with other states, they give importance to their relative gains. Like if two states are cooperating on some front, like on the front of trade, and the other party is gaining more, then it discourages the second state to cooperate more on that front. A third version of neorealism is found in security studies. So here scholars, they talk about offensive and defensive realism. Now what is offensive and defensive realism? Offensive realism is something which is, it is associated with John Mearsheimer. Offensive realism assumes that state seeks to maximize their power and influence to achieve security through domination and hegemony. It means that every state it try to increase their power to such an extent that nobody could actually challenge its position. In a way, if you want to be sure about your own security, that nobody would be able to challenge the security and stability of a state, then you have to gain disproportionate power in comparison to all other potential competitors or enemy. Offensive realism is a structural strategy in international relations that belongs to neorealist school of thought. Second one is defensive realism. So the theory finds its foundation in Kenneth Walt's theory of international politics, in which Waltz argues that anarchical structure of the international system encourages states to maintain moderate and reserved policies to attain national security. Here it means that international structure, since it is marked by anarchy, it creates a lot of insecurities for the state. It makes a state less confident whether it is capable to ensure the security of its people or to protect its borders. Then every state is forced to act in a certain manner. In a way, every state has to increase its power to deal with that anarchy. And every state will be on its own because there is no guiding authority. And a state's position can be challenged by anyone, by any other states, a neighboring country, or any other powerful states, because you don't know what other states are planning or what they are intending to do. Now, neorealism also have certain limitations, so it is also not a theory which is complete in its own sense. But when we compare it with the classical realism, it is comparatively more systematic. So it makes us capable of understanding and analyzing the behavior of a state in a more systematic manner. Now, what are the limitations of neorealism? So, first limitation is that, like any other theory of international relations, it is not a complete theory. Although it is like more relevant, it is more systematic, it is comparatively more scientific and rational, but it is also not complete. It also has certain drawbacks, certain weaknesses. According to one of the lectures of John Mershimer, he himself acknowledges that neorealism could be probably 70% right about its own assertions, and there is a possibility that 30% of its assertions may not be that correct or that applicable in present world order. Second thing is that not all the states they accept or react to international structure in similar fashion. So if we say that international structure is marked by anarchy, then first thing is that can we say that all the states they will accept this particular argument that in international structure no order is prevailing, that there is no higher authority? For example, in present times we may argue that at the international level various kind of international or regional organizations are existing. For example, United Nations is there. Many regional organizations are also there. Then many international trading regimes or economic institutions are also there. For example, IMF, World Bank, right, or World Trade Organizations. All these institutions are there. Apart from that, it would be wrong to say that international morality or international law, it has no relevance at all, right? So, and second thing is that even if we go by the argument that is given by neo-realist scholars, that every state respond in a similar manner, like when they see that anarchy is prevailing at the international level and no order is prevailing, no higher authority is there, then every state would be bound to increase its own power. Now, it is again questionable in the sense that some state may choose a different path. It means that they'll prefer more to deal with the uncertainties through diplomacy. They may use more persuading strategies. They may, convince other states or motivate other states to engage in cooperation rather than engaging in conflict. They may help other states to provide security and stability even for smaller states. Another important thing is that international system is not marked by anarchy, right? So if you look at the present international system, it is not marked by anarchy. So there is certain kind of order and stability is prevailing. We often talk about liberal international order. So this liberal international order also provides certain kind of stability, right? States are cooperating with each other. In an era of globalization, when complex interdependence is existing, states are cooperating with each other on various fronts. Apart from that, various kind of political systems, they also have an important role to play in determining the foreign policy preferences or behavior of the state. So it would be wrong to say that domestic politics or the nature of political system of a state, it has no role to play in international relations. For example, in case of democratic countries, public opinion matters a lot. State leadership or the ruling class, they are accountable to people, otherwise they may have to face a lot of opposition, right? Another important criticism of neo-realism is that it fails to acknowledge the role of international organizations and international morality. Another important criticism is that there is lot of possibility of cooperation in an era of interdependence and globalization, and probably that is the positive side of international order. Now, the way it has been discussed previously also, that none of the theory is complete. So neorealism, despite being rational, despite being more systematic, it has its own limitations. Although even the criticisms, they also have their own limitations. So, but still we can say that neorealism is one of the most important contribution to realist school of thought. Thank you.